Tzeentch was always clever, but he could never leave well enough alone. Always putting his nose in where it was not needed. Always asking questions that left others uncomfortable, making excuses and then busying themselves with a task that permitted no further discourse. He was always unpopular with the other children, who rarely understood his strange and overly complicated rules to each and every fun endeavour. Tzeentch was clever, in a time when being so was no boon at all. For he was a confusing child, and it was said even his parents did not know what foul spirit had infected their boy to make him so odd. It was a long decade for Prius and Satra, his parents, for they did not understand their wayward child any more than the rest of the village. They did not know why he asked so many damn questions, why he had to know absolutely everything, how he was always disappointed when inevitably his barrage of questions led to inescapable protestations from them both that none know these things, no one normal. You speak like a wizard, for only they know of such matters. And thus the coal was planted, from which the gem would arise. For it was when he was not even in his early adolescence that Tzeentch woke one morning, way before his parents, way before anyone else in his village, for he had planned it thus. And he took what resources he thought he would need. Even as a child, he knew that the staples of his sojourn would be food and water. Thus he packed a small sack, which he tied over his shoulder across his torso, and strode out into the world. His diminutive form was easily hid, and not of the stuff for vainglorious engagements or feats of strength. So Tzeentch travelled by day and to the side of any road. He kept hidden and secret, and avoided the fires of others who might be in the night, for he knew he would merely be returned to his parents, to his village, to his life of being an oddity. But added to that would be failure. So Tzeentch would camp alone and in tiny ditches or under rocks, out of sight. He wandered until his little feet took him to the place he needed to go. For he had listened. He had truly listened to the elders and adults, and to his parents, and he had sought out all he needed to know before ere he set off. There was but one tower in all of this land, and it was that tower he now approached, his little shoes sodden and his clothes unkempt from his weeks of travel, his nights under the stars, his stomach growling, for days ago he had finished his meagre supplies. Now the Tower of the Wizard was a thing of power, built to impress and intimidate. Its central spire went up into the clouds. Its dark walls sheen to a glass-like effect, almost reflective. Its doors as tall as a tree, its knocker far, far above the span or reach of Tzeentch. So he took a rock from the side of the approach, and on the door he did bang. Once, twice, thrice it rang. He waited for a time, what seemed to him like hours, but soon enough the door did slowly creak open. A man of haggard face and bent back did advance his head beyond the portal, sniffing hard in disgust when he saw none there. So Tzeentch cleared his throat and chirruped a halloo. The old man looked down. Lank hair, dusty clothes, his hawk-like beaked nose twitched into a sneer when he saw what was there. Yet he sighed and stood aside, and opened the portal wider. Tzeentch walked into the hall, toward the stairs, and up them without hesitation. He knew this doorman was not who he needed to meet. Forgotten by the boy, the old aide slammed the door and with muttered grumble followed the boy up the stairs. Around and up they climbed. The stairs seemed never-ending, the fall below threatening. But the stairs were wide, and Tzeentch did not even approach the edges. He merely put his fingertips on the walls and then ran them up as he walked. Never faltering, never slowing, never hastening, Tzeentch walked, the still, grumbling old man his shadow. The steps eventually led to doors and rooms and side entrances, yet Tzeentch ignored them all and scaled to the top. And when there was a shimmering door before him at the summit, only then did he stop. The boy now seemed to shake, out of excitement instead of cold, it seemed, despite his sodden and bedraggled visage. The aide just sighed and made a clicking noise with his mouth, indicating the boy should get on with it, or turn around. Without further ado, Tzeentch, who had seen no key, no knocker, no knob on this hurdle, walked straight into the door, and thus through it. Another sigh and clicked response, and the aide was beside him again. He too had walked through the door. He sneered down with a look that clearly stated he was not impressed at the boys' beginner's luck as they continued. And the room was wide and expansive, filled with odd and amazing things to either side of a central carpeted pathway toward an even more impressive door. The objects were of different make, different origin, different materials all, collections of sorts, but without any rhyme or reason, and no hint to their apparent use. Tzeentch, eyes wide with wonder, but path set by determination, ceased his surveying the oddities and strode onto the carpet toward the final door. Again, there was no key, knocker or bar, but Tzeentch still did not walk straight toward it. He stopped. He waited and existed for a period, then put out his tiny hands. He took a step forward, but no further, as he licked his fingertips and extended them again. He looked at them and took 2 steps back. He could feel the winds that were silent and contained but still present, winds he could feel behind the door. It was then that he stepped even further away from said door and turned to the old aide with a quizzical and annoyed look on his face. The aide has shark eyes as he then grinned down at Tzeentch maliciously. "There is no room," the boy accused. "This is your tower. Would you have—" the boy trailed off. "Yes," the old man crooned. "I would have let you drop, had you been hasty." "It would have killed me." "You would have killed yourself. Restraint is the first lesson for those who wish to wield the winds, those who wish to be wizards. Better sooner than later. If you do not have the temperament for the art, then with everything you learn you are more a danger to those around you. A wizard without restraint is an accident waiting to happen. An accident that the world may not be able to afford." "I'm only 10! Yet you have made your way here alone. So you wish to be trained in the art? Or is this a social call?" Tzeentch looked up at the wizard, and then broke his stare and looked at his feet. The wizard continued. "Yet intellect without wisdom is as dangerous as stupidity with authority. Age will not protect you against the blandishments of the dark forces that you will command. For if you do not command them, do not master them, then they will command you. So you are either ready for the challenges or you are not. Which is it, Tzeentch?" The boy looked up again at the mention of a name he had not divulged. I'm ready. I have nowhere else to go. Nowhere else I can learn." "This is not true. You could have made your way to the city, any city, to train as an apprentice. You could have learned words and letters, become a member of church or castle household. You could have learned a trade, learned the most complicated of all disciplines, at the great schools of the Empire for the use of their fire tubes, the cannons. You could have gone on a myriad of pathways, trodden a multitude of roads, ended in a very different place indeed. Yet you are here. You must be honest with yourself, Tzeentch, if not with me. It is the power, no? The excuses, the secrets, the riddles, the cleverness of it all, the knowing of it. But as I have outlined, cleverness can have many outlets. You chose this, to walk alone and without permission, hunted by cold and wet and hunger and danger, all to trudge to the doors of a wizard's tower. All to prove your worth to one you hope to teach you the secrets of the universe. But also to be able to wield power the likes none in your village could ever conceive of matching. To elevate yourself above the other children who were so mean to you. To prove your worth to the elders and to your own parents even. You come here out of vanity, no? Tzeentch stepped back and turned from the old lank-haired man, so he did not see the eyes of the being widen, for he witnessed no childlike protestations or denials. The boy was pacing. He was honestly thinking about this claim. When Tzeentch turned back to the wizard, he did so with a look of certainty, a scrunched and furrowed brow, his little arms crossed over his torso, and his head held high. I do not think you are right. My heart may be filled with this, but my mind is not. I did not daydream about proving them all wrong, because I did not think I would ever go back. I thought I would either die on the way or find my new home. Never did I think I would be turned away. Never did I think to return to my home village. So I say, I think you are wrong. And at that, the elderly man smirked and simply stated, We shall see then, young Tzeentch, for it will be years of cleaning and scrubbing and fetching before ever you even approach a grimoire, let alone have me explain its contents. Still enthused? This is the first conversation of this year that I have enjoyed. I will stay. I will learn. And I will one day be a better wizard than even you. The twinkle in the eye of the older man now shone as he bowed gracefully, and a light appeared beneath his feet and swept up his body as he did so. When he stood again, he was draped in the most sumptuous of finery, the most deep of velvets. Tzeentch did not laugh, but his eyes widened and his smile deepened, as the older man gently but firmly placed his hand on Tzeentch's shoulder and walked him to a door behind a large picture amidst the odd objects. And there they processed into his true inner sanctum. A few years passed, and Tzeentch was now at home, truly at home. He ate with the wizard, learnt from the wizard, leant on the wizard when he was lost or tired or forlorn. He was his apprentice. Yet even with all of his training, Tzeentch could never quite control his nature. He was still young after all, had the exuberance of youth and the vim and verve to match. And so it was that one day he was in the basement, the true ritual site of the wizard. Covered in glyphs of wards and circles, he swept around them all day, cleaning and clearing and making it all spotless. Yet he could not avoid the allure of the game. For every week, Tzeentch would go to the basement and perform his tasks, but always he wondered about the game that was set up in the furthest, deepest room. One chair before it, one mirror to its side, as if the person sitting to play would see themselves as the other combatant. A small square of wood with objects on it, pieces. And the game never ended, but constantly involved positioning, forever positioning. Not one piece had been exchanged or taken. Not one. And eventually, this began to bother Tzeentch. It started as only a concern, an interest, but eventually it played on him night and day. The never-ending circling of the pieces, never engaging, never coming to grips. He said to himself it was an accident. He told himself it was all part of the rich tapestry of life. He told himself later on it was not his fault. But he swept just that little bit too enthusiastically, bumped the board hard that day, and one of the pieces fell over. Toresh looked at the board for minutes, stunned. He looked at his broom, looked at the door, looked at the mirror, and then at the chair. And nothing happened. He half expected the door to fly open and his master to arrive carried upon a summoned thunderhead, lightning coruscating from him. But nothing happened. Nothing. So Toresh took the piece in his hand. He could not be sure of what it was. At first he sweated, fearing the rage of his master. But as the time passed and still nothing happened, he began to bounce the piece in his hand. Then he slammed it down on the board. And he placed it where it could do nothing but be taken. The moment that could begin a furious battle for the center of the board and the beginning of the real fight. As his hand slammed down, the mirror in front of him flashed. A whirlwind of multicolored blinking lights tumultuously spun in the mirror now, only subsiding when a small slither of pink energy wormed its way out of the mirror and onto the floor. Then the image went dead again, and it went clear and reflective, as if nothing had happened. The small slither of energy now curled up on the floor as Toresh looked down, wrapping and folding up into itself. Yet each time a fold fell around it, the hole became larger. It seemed to beat like a heart, and that also made it increase ever so slightly in size with every single beat. Toresh kept a hold of the broom with whitening knuckles, as the being opened up like a petal, and arms and legs eventually unfolded. The small pink being then jumped up onto its feet and ran around the room. It giggled as it ran, large, long arms waving above its head. Toresh then gave a small shrill squeal and burst off after the thing, for it had pranced to the door, and then literally straight through it. Toresh hurled the door open and then crashed after the now running and cartwheeling, giggling pink entity. And wherever the thing bounced, wherever it touched, turned to smoke or gold or silver or water or ashes. The tiles of the floors cracked, the curtains and tapestries burst into flames. And Toresh now shouted in panic at each and every one of its new chaotic gifts of pandemonium. Toresh caught up to the thing, darting past a particularly explosive burning curtain. But when he grabbed what was at hand and hurled it at the pink thing, the thing at hand was an old axe from a bygone age. It turned in the air head over head as it then plunged into the back of the pink thing. The being then instantly fell forward onto its face, ooze coming out of it, but not blood. Toresh looked at the hand that hurled the axe and nodded in surprised self-appreciation. It then stalked towards the slowly melting pink thing. It seemed to dissolve, and then run into two patches on the ground. Patches that then started to beat like hearts, that folded in on themselves, but each time they did, they became bigger. Toresh backed away as he saw this, now witnessing two blue things standing where the pink had fell. But this time, their eyes were red, their gait guarded, their teeth sharper and their claws longer. The two blue things looked at each other morosely. Then their eyebrows furrowed into a look of rage, as they both turned their heads in sync and glowered at Toresh. The boy then saw them open their mouths wide and snarl, before taking their first bounds towards him. Toresh ran to the door and past it, shutting it in swiftly behind him. But of course, as he turned and ran, he saw that the two blue things simply hopped through the door, as had done the pink they were formed from, and they chased him. Up the stairs, through the corridors, round the tower they chased poor Toresh, until finally he got to the highest point of the tower again. As he did, the wizard walked through the door, as Toresh had done all those months before. The wizard looked to the boy, to his state, then down to the oncoming horrors. He sighed and waved his hand, and they both exploded, only to reform again into two separate beings of their own, so one had now become 4. The wizard did not permit them to complete the process. As the heartbeat and growing began again, he spoke in a language that should not exist, made signs that should not be known by mortal men, and the 2 things combusted and then blew away on the winds. The wizard then looked to Tarish, who seemed to be trying to make himself as small and unobtrusive as possible. The wizard stepped forward and took the boy's chin in his hand and wrenched his face up to meet his glare. "Well, boy, it seems you need more lessons." "I did not mean to." "Of course you did. It is why I set up that little game. To test you. Some things you obviously cannot learn at the moment. At the least, you stopped playing when only 1 had arrived. Better than any of my other apprentices," said the old man as he let go of the boy. "Even the ones that lived to complete the training." Welcome, gentle listener. I am Baldermort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the forces, factions, and units of the Warhammer 40k universe, the grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace, there is only time for war. And today, we shall be discussing some of the most splendid examples of the power of the warp, the twisted realm of the dark gods of chaos. For today, we shall be discussing, in brief, the foot soldiery of the forces of the Lord of Change, Tzeentch. Of course, I can only be speaking of the dreaded horrors. And so, as usual, for the very basics, let us lean on existing wisdom. To quote, horrors. Lesser demons of Tzeentch are literally magic made manifest. Pink horrors, as they are known, frolic together in cheerful, brightly coloured mobs that caper and whirl, cackling insanely at their own incomprehensible jokes as they blur and cartwheel across the battlefield. As bright bolts of raw sorcery leap from their outstretched fingers, the pink horrors are filled with an increased joy, emitting squeals of laughter supplemented with many oohs and ahs of delight as the magical light show screams overhead. These energies have a tendency to engulf the pink horror's enemies in searing conflagrations of mutation, much to the joy of the demons themselves. The principal weapon of the lesser demon of Tzeentch is not its scrambling claws or the gaping, fang-lined maw that sits amidst its rubbery torso, though one bitten or scratched by a horror will be forever changed by the experience. Instead, it is the raw warp energy that flows in the creature's veins. With a cackled word or gibbered phrase, the horror throws balls of multicoloured flame at the enemy. Where these strike home, they do not merely burn, but also wreak the most disturbing and peculiar changes, turning enemies to statues of screaming glass, to clouds of butterflies with agonized human faces, or strains of maddened music, mewling infants, or horrific mounds of tentacled flesh. Only Tzeentch can know what strange fate awaits those kissed by warp fire. Even the horrors themselves are oblivious, and take great joy in each sanity-shattering change as it is wrought. The only known way to end a pink horror's jubilant mood is to blow it to pieces or otherwise cut it apart. It is then that the pink horror undergoes a total transformation, splitting into halves that reshape themselves into smaller copies of the original. These new demons are different from their predecessor in 2 respects. The first is their colour changes from pink to vivid blue, earning them the name of blue horrors. The second change is that the gleeful attitude of the pink horror is reversed. Blue horrors are morose, whining and petty, eternally squabbling about whose fault it was that they lost their pink status once again. These replacement forms are miserable and sullen to the point of aggression, lurching after those who ruined their day to stab and throttle until they kill those with the temerity to have killed them first. Should a blue horror be killed before it can gain its revenge, it will divide once more into two tiny brimstone horrors, blazing yellow manifestations of pure spite and bitterness that seek only to burn their enemies to scattering ash. End quote. Now, horrors are a thing that have caused quite a few upsets in the meta and the gaming community over their time. Terrible little things, they're annoying and can pop up nearly anywhere if your opponent has brought summoners or lords and has set aside segments of their force or reinforcement points to bring more of the tiny terrors into battle. Wonderful little figures and deeply confusing at times, for destroying a pink horror, as we have heard, can mean that the enemy can then replace them with two blue horrors. If the blue horror is slain, then it can be replaced with two brimstone horrors. Thus, if the opponent has placed enough points in reserve, this unit can tar pit a hugely costly or important enemy unit for the entirety of the game. They can fire spells and cancel those of others, yet they are easily slain in their bucket loads. Tzeentch, an army that matches its master down to the ground, where fluff matches crunch, as to fight against the forces of the Lords of Change, is a maddening event indeed, as it should be. I have been Baldermort, your faithful servant. I hope you've enjoyed this brief introduction to Tzeentchian horrors. If so, then please consider liking and subscribing. If you do, then hit the notifications button, as I would not want you to miss out. If you see the worth in what we are doing, then do also consider joining our Patreon, or giving the video a share if that is beyond your present scope. It would be a great boon. Now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.